Hello everybody, my name is Zen and welcome to a special video where we're going to compare Diablo 2 Resurrected on PC and on console and kind of look at the differences between graphical fidelity, the UI, and gameplay. A couple things to note before we get started. First and foremost, this is going to be on the Diablo 2 Resurrected beta, which means that before the game launches in September, there may be some changes, and just to kind of keep that in mind. I don't expect any significant gameplay or UI changes, but I do expect some performance upgrades as the game becomes more and more optimized for launch. The second thing to note is that I am testing the PC version on my Uber PC, which has a RTX 2070 Super and a Ryzen 7 processor. It's a crazy machine. It runs basically any game at 60 FPS on max settings. As for the console version, I am running it on an Xbox One S, not a Series S, an Xbox One S. The reason why is because, well, it's happens to be the console that I have, but also it's better to test it on the previous generation of consoles rather than the next generation of consoles, just so we get a better baseline of how this game is going to perform across the board on all of the consoles. It's to be expected that if you're running an Xbox Series X or S, or if you're running a PlayStation 5, that the game is going to be way more improved graphically and load times and all of that. So just kind of take all of that stuff with a grain of salt when you're looking at the fidelity stuff, because of course, if you're running an older generation console, then this is how the game is going to look, but otherwise you can expect a bit better on the newer stuff. So the first thing that I really want to dive in and look at is the differences in UI, because I think they're the most significant changes that you notice from version to version between PC and console. As you can see on the bottom of the screen here, we have a UI setup that's typical of like Diablo 3. And not just, typical of Diablo 3, but kind of more on the Diablo 3 PC version. The console version obviously has a different UI setup for Diablo 3 than this, but we need to kind of get into this and why this is significant and why this is different than on the PC. First and foremost, you see that I have all of my abilities on the bottom of the screen here. If I hold left trigger, I can swap bars, which is nice. So you have a bunch of bindings that you can do. Now on PC, you have your left click and your right click, and you can go through and bind those to different keys. And then if you're using a mouse, you can scroll wheel up and down to go between the different abilities, or you could just hit the buttons to hot swap between them. The reason this is significant is because on the console, or at least using a controller, because you could use a controller on PC, I should definitely mention that. You don't need to do any of this swapping, so you're basically saving yourself a button press. It is technically a bit quicker to hit your abilities on the console because of this. So when it comes to the potions, they're all bound to the D-pad, as you can see there, which is quite nice. Now, when we want to look at different stuff, the map is bound to what is essentially the select button. When you hit the menu button, it pops up this, so it goes straight to your inventory, which is quite nice, actually. I like that a lot. And you can swap between everything just freely by using the shoulder buttons. And you have your skill tree, which you can see works just fine. I'm going to talk about binding skills in a second. You can see your mercenary, which is nice. So when you open up your inventory, you can kind of swap things between them. You have options. I'm going to take a quick look at the options in a second. But then you have your character screen, your quest log, and your party screen if you're playing multiplayer. So that's how all of the menus essentially work. So one thing I will check real quick is to show you what a vendor looks like and how that works, because of course this is a little bit different on PC. So let's say, for example, I had, I don't know, a bunch of mana potions. The thing is, being able to sell this stuff is kind of annoying. I'm just going to purchase this too, because you have to either use the stick to go between items in your inventory, or you have to use the D-pad, which you can see goes between individual pieces. And then you hold X to sell. So it is a little slower than it is on PC, where you can just control left click and just get rid of it. I just dropped that on accident. See, this is a problem. You kind of have to relearn how to play the game if you're playing on controller. But I will say it is quite nice. Now let's go ahead and dive into the bindings. So the way this works is like if I wanted to bind my Firestorm, for example, I hold X, it pops up my bars, and then I can see, you know, how to bind it. So if I wanted to bind it to the left trigger one, I would hold left trigger and hit B. Otherwise, you know, I like it on B, so I'm just going to keep it there. Right, that's how that works. Now, there are some general skills that I find interesting that you can bind. Obviously, you could bind your town portal, which is nice. It saves a bit of time, and you can see the count of how many scrolls you have just on your bar. So, like, if I hold left trigger, you see it's down at the bottom. It's easier to keep an eye on it. You know, just by looking at stuff like that. So as for the rest of the common skills that you can bind, you could bind the run, toggle, walk, run thing, but you could do that just by pushing left stick down. But I suppose if you don't like that, or if you're playing on a different kind of controller, then it's nice to be able to bind that. So it's a bit of an accessibility thing. You can toggle item labels. So, you know, as like items are on the ground, you could toggle that off and on. The reason I like that this is here is because this is a new change with the beta compared to the technical alpha, where before item labels, you had to hold the button to see them pop up. Now we can toggle them, which is quite nice. It's a good another good accessibility thing. You could change auto map. You could swap weapons. Otherwise, if you're pushing the right stick down, it switches between weapons. Okay. So again, another accessibility change. And then you have the emote wheel, which I haven't checked this out, and I wanted to do it while we did this as I hit the wrong button. So we're going to bind it to, let's do left trigger and then Y. Oh, that's actually really nice. So you could just be like, hey, I'm going back to town. Which you would see like, it's interesting that it doesn't seem to do anything. Oh, you can link items. Oh, that's nice. Oh, it would be, I guess it's in chat. You know, it's a nice way of communicating if you're playing on console with other people. So that's how the binding works. Of course, you also have loot, interact. And the reason I loot one there is, again, because of accessibility. Throw, and of course, unsummon. The options menu here, we're looking at a couple different things. So video-wise, you can change some of the settings for the legacy mode, because of course we can enter that. I'll show you that in a second. There is some audio settings here, just normal stuff. You know, nothing too crazy. Obviously, there's no video settings for the actual game, because the stuff doesn't usually be able to, you know, it's not usually adjustable on console anyways. And then gameplay-wise, you have a bunch of different options here. So the options menu is ripe with a bunch of stuff, and I like it. But as you can see, the interface, you know, works for playing on a controller. So I do want to get into how the gameplay actually functions with this. But in general, I do want to mention before I move forward that, yes, I actually do like playing on a controller. It feels natural. Does it feel like it does on Diablo 3 console, which I think is excellent? Yes, if not just a slightly bit clunkier in inventory management, but that's fine because that's how Diablo 2 kind of is, and it does relive a bit of that. Overall, I would say 9 out of 10 on implementation for being able to play Diablo on the console. Now, let's jump into a graphical comparison between the two games. As you see, the PC version is quite a bit sharper than the console version. My PC version, I increased the brightness a bit because I have a screen that shows darks really, really well, which means that it's kind of hard to see in the middle of the day, so my brightness is fairly high. Now, there's obviously the difference there, but when it comes to the actual fidelity, it is definitely sharper on the PC. There's no surprise there. I'm not surprised in the slightest. In fact, it's nice to be playing on PC because the game consistently runs at 60 FPS compared to on the Xbox, which it just doesn't. And the other thing to consider here is that there is a slight zoom effect going on with the console version. So they reduce the amount of screen space that is on the screen just to reduce the amount of stuff that is being used by the Xbox at any given point, which increases the performance a bit. So that's just something to consider. Another thing here is that the UI scale is a bit different on the console compared to the PC. The reason this is simply because of the fact that on PC, you're like right in front of your screen, and then on console, you're obviously sitting on a couch. This next test is something I want to do based on the quick resume function that consoles tend to have now. I have since restarted my console, so it is now booted up. I'm on the home thing, so I'm just going to open it up, and it should quick resume, right? Which brings us into your connection has been interrupted, obviously. You must reconnect to Battle.net, obviously. It's, you know, nothing to be disappointed with. Obviously, that is gonna happen if you turn your console off. And then it reconnects you very slowly, and then here I am on the character screen. Speaking of character screens, I am going to quickly compare the two, because again, you see that on PC it is a bit sharper, it just looks better, but it's not bad on console either. It works for what it is, and the UI is definitely different in order to compensate for the fact that you're using a controller and you're, again, sitting on your couch from very far away. And the final test that I want to do is actually based on the load time of the game. So we're going to boot it up fresh, and you guys can see the load time on the Xbox One S, which isn't the greatest. Now, obviously, I'm used to playing on the PC, where the load time is freaking fantastic. It's still, you know, when you're going through your town portal, has a slight delay compared to if you were just playing, you know, standard D2, but it has gotten better. And the reason that's important is because people who like to speedrun the game, that is precious moments being taken out of their time if they're doing Diablo 2 Resurrected versus just standard Diablo 2. Now, you could skip all this stuff, but it takes a bit of loading in between each one. And you could see that wasn't too bad booting up. I've had worse games. I think that if you're going to sit down and play this on the console, you kind of expect that. But if you're on the newer consoles, obviously that will take a bit more time to get used to the quick startup, right? A lot of us who are using like the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4 are used to starting games and getting up and like getting a drink and getting some food and then coming and sitting back down, right? It's just how it is. But games like, for instance, Overcooked All You Can Eat take forever to load on the Xbox One. This, not so bad. I would say it's about a medium setting for me. So finally, I want to wrap everything up by talking about gameplay and my final thoughts on the differences between the two versions of the game. When it comes to gameplay, obviously on the PC, it's a bit faster. You have a mouse and keyboard. You can maneuver the inventory much quicker. You can sell and buy things much quicker. It just is the way that the interface works with the player there. I mean, the game was designed for a mouse and keyboard to begin with, so it is to be expected that that kind of stuff is going to be a bit quicker. When it comes to the console, it's not bad. Right, playing it with a controller is not bad. And in fact, if I were hanging out in my office and, you know, I have a standing desk now, and if I wanted to actually sit down and relax, would I play the game at my computer with a controller? Possibly, but I'm gonna just default to going and sitting down on my couch and playing on the console instead. So that should actually give you a pretty good idea of how I'm feeling about it, which is that it is great. When it comes to Diablo 3, I had tried the console version a pretty long ways after it actually launched, and I was always on the side of things, and maybe you're like this about Diablo in general. I was always on the side of I'm going to be playing on PC because it's better, it plays better, it looks better and everything. But when I first played Diablo 3 on my console, I was shocked that it played so well and that I actually kind of preferred playing with a controller in many ways. It felt like I had greater individual movement control over my character. Obviously, inventory management's a bit harder, but for the actual gameplay, it felt really nice. In particular, playing with melee characters like a barbarian or a monk or a crusader and stuff like that. Playing with a demon hunter was a little bit more difficult, because I like to stutter step and kind of move away from enemies and just do advanced movement, and that's a little harder to do on a controller. With that said, when it comes to Diablo 2, it's kind of the same thing. It feels better to move around on the controller than it does with keyboard and mouse, because on keyboard and mouse, you can definitely feel the grid. Because, of course, original Diablo 2 runs on a grid, and when you're using keyboard and mouse, you can feel that movement a little bit more, whereas using a controller masks it. I think the majority of my gameplay is going to be on PC. It just makes the most sense for me as a player. I like the quicker load times. I like the better looking version of the game. Now, granted, if I had a new Xbox, like a Series X, and the game looked equivalent to that it does on the PC, then that wouldn't really be too much of a consideration anymore, and I would probably swap between them a bit more. But when it comes to running it on an Xbox One, I think that if I wanted to go sit down on the couch, if I wanted to just kind of go relax and play a game, that would be the preferred method of play, which tells you a lot that it's kind of interchangeable for me. You know, I used to, again, be that person who only would play Diablo on PC, but now that I've played it on console and now that I've played D2R on console, it really works for me, and I like it quite a bit. And I think it's something that everybody should consider is which platform you want to play it on if you could only buy one. It's not bad on console, but the thing to consider is that there is no crossplay. You cannot play with PC players on console, and currently console players cannot play across platform. So that's fine in the way that it exists, but for me, it doesn't really matter that much, because if I'm transferring between console and PC, the only thing that matters is cross progression, and that is in, and it totally works just fine. Like, I can log out on my PC in, you know, in an area of wherever I'm at. Like, let's say I'm logging out in the rogue encampment, and I have a bunch of stuff in my inventory. When I jump on the console version, I'm right where I left off. I've got all my stuff still. It's just, it's seamless, and it works really, really well. So my final thoughts are that Diablo 2 Resurrected on console is fantastic, and it's definitely something people should consider, you know, which platform they want to play it on. I think PC is the better version, but that said, it's not a bad version of the game on console, especially if you're playing on the newest console, like a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X. But at the same time, it really depends on who you are as a player. Are you going to try to no-life the game? Then maybe mouse and keyboard might be a bit better, especially if you have a nice PC. Or if you're more into just kind of relaxing, sitting down, you're okay with going a bit slower because of the clunkiness of the UI and how it's designed for mouse and keyboard to begin with, then console is probably the better option. With all of that being said, thank you guys very much for watching. I'm looking forward to this game releasing and playing it on both console and PC, because again, that's how I'm going to end up playing this game, and that is just the way that it's going to work for me, and I'm going to enjoy it on console too, and that says a lot about the console version. But we shall see you guys next time.